Hello. Benjamin Franklin only attended formal education between the age of 8 and 10, but went on to become one of North America's most famous polymaths and a leading figure in science, philosophy, and diplomacy. So, where did all this come from? What sparked his love of learning? And what was schooling like in the 18th century? I'm your host, Henry Wilkinson, and to answer these questions, I'm going to be talking to Jason Gallagher, who is currently head of Franklin's former school, the Boston Latin School. Jason is also an alum of the school and will be talking to us about how Franklin is remembered at BLS over 300 years later. Jason, hello.
Hi, Henry. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to the podcast. So you are head of school at the Boston Latin School. Can you tell us a little bit about its history and why it's an important school in America?
So Boston Latin School is the oldest school in America. Our motto is Sumus Primi, which in Latin means we are first. It was founded on April 23rd, 1635, by the town of Boston. Predates Harvard College or Harvard University by more than a year. And it was created really as a school focused on the humanities. The founders of the school shared with the ancient Greeks the belief that the only good things are the goods of the soul. So Edmund Burke referred to America as exemplifying the dissidence of dissent. And from its beginning, Boston Latin School has taught its scholars dissent with responsibility and has persistently encouraged such levels of dissent. And the school was created in great measure because of the influence of the Reverend John Cotton, who sought to create in the New World a school like the Free Grammar School of Boston, England, which I'm heard is still active these days, in which Latin and Greek were taught and had a lot of those classical themes.
Great. So the school was founded in 1635, did you say?
Yes, 1635.
And Benjamin Franklin, he was born 1706, so he would have been attending the school at the very beginning of the 18th century. So what was the school like, or how did the school look during that period?
So in Boston here itself, Boston Latin was one of two grammar schools that taught the classics, meaning Latin and Greek. There was a second school, the North Grammar School, which was in existence from about 1700 to 1789. And there were also writing schools where reading, writing, and ciphering were taught. But beginning in 1719, the grammar schools were dismissed for an hour a day to study at one of the writing schools. So what they taught at the school were Greek and Latin, as well as reading, writing, math, spelling. And then the writing schools taught a lot of the fundamentals of reading, writing, and arithmetic.
We heard in one of our earlier episodes that Franklin was born on the south side. So was the Latin school based in South Boston and then the writing school, like you say, in North Boston?
So I believe that the location of the school when Benjamin Franklin attended is actually in Boston proper, which is almost in the central part of the city. And I think that they designated the north part being something that was north of the central part of the city. And so when Franklin attended Boston Latin School in 1714, he was about 8 years old, and I think he went to another school later on for a private school. But when he attended Boston Latin School, the studies that he would have had there were, other than Latin, reading, writing, arithmetic, there would have been an usher and a head of school who were responsible for making sure that he had access to those specific subjects.
And you're the current head of school 200, 300 years later. Is the role pretty much the same?
Oh, no, it's very, very different. I'm pretty sure that the head of school back then didn't have to deal with things like artificial intelligence or the use of cell phones in school. So certainly, there are certainly some differences for sure. The staff back in the day really consisted of the head of school and only one, what they called master, together who would run the school because the school was rather small at the time.
So who would have had access to the Boston Latin School? You said it was quite a small institution. I wonder if you could give us a sense of how many other students would have been there and what would these students have been like? What kind of backgrounds would these students have had?
So what's interesting is that the founders of the Mass Bay Colony, of which the town of Boston is a part of, believe that all children should have access to education. There was actually a law that was passed in 1642 that required elementary education of all students. So many would have received their education in the writing schools where they learned the basics. And then there were other programs that dropped long after Ben Franklin had moved on from schools. But I would say that most of the time that Ben Franklin was at Boston Latin School is defined as there were 3 rows of benches for the boys on each side of the room, And the classes were held in a single room at the first site, which was actually the home of the head of school at the time. So I wouldn't say there were a lot of students who are Boston Latin School. We don't know an exact number, but given that there were only 3 rows of bunches for the boys on each side, we're guessing that the numbers were pretty small.
And back then it was a single-sex boys-only school. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. It was boys only, and they were all held in the same schoolhouse, which actually belonged to the head of school at the time.
So we've talked about what the students in general would have been studying at these schools. Let's focus now more on Benjamin Franklin. I wonder if you could tell us what kind of a student would Benjamin Franklin have been like? How long was he at the school? And give us a sense of what a day in the life of a young Benjamin Franklin at the Boston Latin School would have been like.
We know that Benjamin Franklin entered Boston Latin School in 1714 at the age of 8 and left within about a year. His time there constituted almost the entirety of his formal education. His studies would have included Latin, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And in addition to the elementary subjects, the description of the curriculum that we have going back to 1712, which was written by Nathaniel Williams, who was the master at the time, it states that the first 3 years of a student's schooling are spent learning by heart, and then according to their capacities, understanding the accidents and nomenclature and construing and parsing according to the English rules of syntax, Puerites, Cato, and Codurius, and Aesop's fables. So those are directly from the tercentenary history of Boston Latin School. And of course, we mentioned the schoolhouse was very small. All the students were in the same room where there were about 3 rows of benches on each side. So while we don't have an exact account of what the school day was like for Ben Franklin while at Boston Latin School, we do know what the school day was like in the early 1700s. So we know that students were admitted by examination. Students are responsible for reading a few verses from the Bible to show that they can read proficiently. And then members of the 6 or 7 classes of the school sat at different benches in the schoolhouse, as we have mentioned. The students studied Latin and Greek in the elementary subjects. The morning session would start at 7 o'clock in the morning in the summer and 8 o'clock in the winter and ended at 11. School would resume at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and ran until 5 o'clock. At the 11 o'clock hour or at the 5 o'clock hour, or maybe even both, the students would attend one of the writing schools nearby. And then on Thursday, school would be dismissed early at 10 o'clock, so pupils might have the opportunity of attending the Thursday lecture, which is another heritage coming from Boston, England.
And would that be Monday to Friday or Monday to Saturday, or the 7 days a week?
According to our data, it looks like it was Monday through Friday.
Okay, so quite a long school day, but it wasn't a boarding school. Is that right? The students would have to. They'd have to make their own way to the school and their own way to the writing schools as well, obviously. Was there a kitchen on site? Did the students have to bring a packed lunch, or do you get a sense of maybe there was somewhere to eat?
We get a sense that based on the size of the school, the students were expected to eat before they came to school, and then when they left at 11 would eat while they were gone, because it appears as if the schoolhouse did not have enough room for a kitchen and places for the students to eat.
Right, because it was essentially the master's house as well, so he would have been having his lunch there.
Right.
Okay. So just a follow-up question to what you just mentioned. You said that there was an entry exam. Presumably Franklin would have had to sit this in order to become a student. Do you know roughly how this exam manifested? Was it a written exam, an oral exam? Was there multiple stages?
The one thing we know for certain is that students were required to read a passage with the Bible clearly and then be able to comprehend what they read from the Bible and describe it to the master in order to gain acceptance.
I'm pretty sure that Franklin would have aced that, because we heard in our previous episode that Franklin's family were very religious. They went to the South Meeting House quite a lot. And his father especially probably would have given Franklin the skills to have aced this exam and become a student at the Latin school. But then it would also potentially be his father who took him out again so that he could become an apprentice tallow chandler at the age of 10. So we've talked about the entry exam and how to become a student at BLS. Mm-hmm. Would you be able to talk for a moment about who wasn't able to go to school during this time? Was there a general
I don't have anything that says who wasn't allowed to go. I would just guess that like if you weren't able to pass that assessment, you could not attend the school. So
Yeah. Okay. Oh, very well, very quickly. If, say, Franklin did mess up his exam, would he have been able to retake it, or did you only get one chance to do it?
it sounds like students as young as 7 were able to take the assessment. And if you did not pass, there's no evidence that there were multiple opportunities to take the test. So it's hard to say.
Okay. There's not any record of someone doing it every year until they're 15 and then finally
Not that we
they're
could
let
find. Yeah. But we do know that even though Benjamin Franklin's time at Boston Latin School was fairly brief, we also know that it had a pretty significant impact on him.
Yeah, so I wondered, do you know why his time was relatively short compared to perhaps the usual student?
Well, we don't know for sure. We just know that within a year he left, and then that he may have attended another private school somewhere else. We just not sure where.
But as you say, within that year, it was a very formative time for Benjamin Franklin. And do you know, coming into school at the age of 8, was that the usual starting age for a person to start school in this period?
Yes, at the time that was the approximate age of students who started school at Boston Latin. They were
And
much younger at the time in the elementary ages.
would they have had any kind of education prior to that? Or would it have been more of a homeschooling situation and then they go at the age of 8?
Most of what they would have learned before attending the school would have been learned at home or through some sort of family resource that they use.
And you mentioned the curriculum as well. You have the 1712 curriculum, which is very interesting.
Right?
It sounds like it's pretty much modeled on the British system or the English system at the time. And you said as well that the school was modeled after the Boston equivalent in England.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting to see that they were when they brought the ideas to the New World, they were trying to model what they had seen in England and trying to provide that for all of its citizens.
And so Benjamin Franklin, who was a student for a relatively short period, but the school definitely left its mark on him and set him up to become the person that we know him as today. I wonder if in the rest of his life, and he lived a very long time, Benjamin Franklin died at the age of 84, did he ever have contact with the school again after he left as a young man?
Well, we don't have a lot of evidence that there was contact between Ben Franklin after he left the school. We do know that it had a significant impact on him. When he passed, in his will, he left funds to the Boston Public Schools. And those funds, to this day, the interest from his bequest are used to purchase silver medals that are awarded to the top 7 scholars at Boston Latin School every year at graduation. Like I said, the Franklin medals are still awarded to this day. It's a very prestigious award, and it's given to the top seniors in class 1. And it really means a lot to our students. Like, they're regularly talking about Franklin medalists and who are going to be awarded the Franklin medals. So clearly there was an impact on Ben Franklin if he left a bequest for us. And the impact continues today in that students are regularly talking about who their Franklin medalists are.
That's great. And we'll talk more about the school in the 21st century towards the end of the episode. But before we get into the 21st century, let's talk a bit more about what happened to the school after Franklin leaves. Mm-hmm. Obviously, during this period, the 18th century, we've got the build up to the eventual American Revolution. People are choosing sides. You have patriots, you have loyalists. Are the students at the school, or even the staff at the school, is there any evidence that there's divisions occurring, or are there people taking a side in this period?
There's actually a very interesting story about John Lovell, who was appointed to be the master of Boston Latin School in 1734. They actually quoted as saying he was the pride of Boston's parents, yet the terror of the youth. So in 1760, John Lovell's son James was appointed an usher at Boston Latin School. James was an ardent patriot, whereas John was a strong loyalist. And the story is that they had to teach from desks at opposite ends of the schoolroom and voicing opposite political convictions, which really typified many a Boston family in those trying times, the separation between being a loyalist and being a patriot.
I was going to say, what happened to the master of the school when obviously the the city of Boston is essentially evacuated, and the war is kicking off in full.
Well, what we know is that on the morning of April 19th of 1775, one of the more dramatic episodes in the history of Boston Latin School occurred. The master, John Lovell, angrily announced that war had begun and school's done. Deponite libros, which means put your books down. And when the British evacuated Boston in March of 1776, both of the Lovells had to sail with Lord Howe to Halifax, Nova Scotia. The difference is that the father, John Lovell, was there as Howe's guest, whereas the son, James, was there as a prisoner. And then later, James was exchanged as a prisoner and became a delegate to the Continental Congress, while the elder Lovell remained in Halifax until his death in 1778.
Wow, so they never really got over their differences, and they pretty much stuck to their guns with that one.
Yeah, apparently that must have been a tough time for that family.
So, as well as Benjamin Franklin, were there any other famous alumni from the school during this period who perhaps played a role in the American Revolution?
Well, it's Benjamin Franklin certainly had some interesting friends and colleagues who played a pretty major role in the history of the United States. And so, in addition to Ben Franklin, there were 4 other BLS alumni who were signers of the Declaration of Independence: John Hancock, Samuel Adams, Robert Tree Payne, and William Hooper all signed the Declaration of Independence, and they are alum of the Boston Latin School. We had a number of other really famous alumni who, from this period, many of whom were members of the clergy or representatives of the state and federal government, businessmen, and a few others, such as Samuel Langdon, who was the president of Harvard College, Thomas Cushing, who was the lieutenant governor for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, followed by becoming the governor, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of Massachusetts, and a member of the Continental Congress. We also had James Bowdoin, who was a governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as well as the Bowdoin College, which is in Maine, was named for him. We had Nathaniel Gorham, who was president of the Continental Congress and one of the signers of the Constitution of the United States. So Ben Franklin certainly had a lot of famous alumni who came in the years during and after him here at Boston Latin School.
And do you think whenever he crossed paths with these people, he would have had something in common in terms of they went to the same school? Is there a term for former students, or how do you refer to your alumni? Is there a sort of...
Well, we really just refer to each other as alum, as BLS alum. And we've certainly, as we've grown over the years, there are a lot of things we talk about. But the phrase that we use most often when we meet someone who's been to our school is we'll say Summus Primi, which means we are first, just designating that we were the first school in America.
All right.
There's no record of Ben Franklin sharing that with John Hancock or Samuel Langdon, but I like to think that maybe they did.
Yeah, I'm sure they would have discussed it at least once, on at least one occasion. So war is over, the school is open again, the students are coming back. I wonder if we could maybe talk a bit about how the school gets to where it is today. I wonder if you could fill in the gaps for us and tell us, how does the school develop over the next 200 years?
Yeah, so after the war, school was resumed under Samuel Hunt, and he ruled with some difficulty until the early 1800s. And so he was then succeeded by William Bigelow, who then resigned after about 9 years of trying to get it beefed up as well. In 1812, a new building of about 3 stories was constructed on the site of its previous location on School Street. And then in 1814, when Benjamin Apthorpe Gould was appointed headmaster, while he was still a senior at Harvard University, is when we really started to see the restoration of order and scholarship. And many of the features that we have at Latin School today, things like a misdemeanor mark for misbehavior or the practice of declamation in classes, those things were really initiated under Gould. And we extended our school to be a 5-year course of study in 1814. And prior to that, students had come in at the age of 7. We raised that to the age of 9. And Gould also was the one who began to foster the beginnings of a library, issued regular reports, which we now call report cards, of scholarship to families, and really placed the responsibility of pupils' conduct on the families themselves. There were also some of the elements of the admission process, which stayed in place to make sure students could demonstrate adequate preparation for the public Latin school, given the demanding course of study that was being provided to the boys, including an entrance exam to show the proficiency And so the city also decided, the city of Boston itself expanded educational opportunities for youth coming from the Boston Latin curriculum rooted in the classics, which really helped to create other schools in Boston, including the English High School, which was an exam school at the time as well, which is one of the nation's other first public schools. So that was a very formative time for our school growing during that time, but it took a little bit of a period after the war for us to adjust to that. And but ultimately, Boston Latin School stayed in that School Street area for approximately 200 years.
It sounds as though across the 19th century, the school expands and becomes pretty much what it is today. You said that there was a 3-story building, so I assume that the intake, the number of students was getting larger and larger. And presumably, eventually, that would cause the school to move again to where you currently are. I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about how the school ends up where it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 1844 is the first time that Boston Latin moved off of School Street. They established a new school building on Bedford Street. And as part of that building, really Gould's dream of having a school library became a reality. So that was a big step forward. And the required age of applicants for students by 1847 was then changed to the age of 12. And then as the landscape of public education in the city of Boston actually started to change and become more progressive, Girls High School was established in 1852 as the first public high school for girls in the country, with the focus really on training girls to become teachers. And by 1870, the course of study had increased to 8 years. And so a lot had changed at Boston Latin School over the years. And by 1877 is the first time that we actually had an African-American graduate of the public Latin school. His name was Parker Bailey.
So the admissions process becomes more inclusive during this time. But you're still a boys' school, is that right?
Yep. And Boston Latin School would remain an all-boys school until 1972, when our first female students were admitted to Boston Latin School.
And do you know, just generally across America, 1972, was there many other schools that were doing this, or were you one of the first to be admitting female students as well as male students?
Most schools had already integrated boys and girls together. And one of the reasons why they were kept separate here in Boston is because there was a girls' Latin school and then Boston Latin School, which was considered the boys' Latin school. There was a lot of pressure in the 60s to ensure the inclusion of females to Boston Latin School. And then September of 1972, that was finally realized.
Is there anything left of the previous school houses or buildings that the Boston Latin School once occupied?
The building on Warren Avenue is still standing. All that's remaining of the original sites on School Street are, the King's Chapel is still there, which took over some of that area. And then there is a mosaic on the ground that commemorates the exact location of the original Latin school, which is also right next to which I'm sure we'll talk about now I just ruined my answer, which is right next to the Benjamin Franklin statue.
And so that brings me nicely back to Benjamin Franklin. You've mentioned previously that you have the Benjamin Franklin medals at the school. Are there any other ways that Franklin is remembered as a former student at Boston Latin School?
So here at Boston Latin School, Benjamin Franklin is remembered not only through the Franklin medals, but also in our school auditorium and our assembly hall. We have an upper frieze which honors many of our distinguished alum. And Benjamin Franklin is one of those members of our upper frieze, as well as some of his contemporaries, such as John Hancock, Sam Adams, or even more recent people like Leonard Bernstein. So yeah, he's a permanent part of our assembly hall here at the school. And then, of course, at the location of the original school on Boston Latin School on School Street in downtown Boston, there is an 8-foot bronze statue of Ben Franklin commemorating his life here in the city of Boston. The base of his statue has 4 bronze panels, which have key moments in Franklin's life, such as his work as a printer, his famous electricity experiment, his role in signing the Declaration of Independence. And directly next to that statue is a mosaic, which they call the City Carpet, which was created by an artist which is almost like a hopscotch court, which features an image of the old Boston Latin School along with historical facts and illustrations of children. So it's a kind of a nice area on School Street commemorating Boston Latin School and Ben Franklin.
And am I right in thinking it's the only statue of that kind of Benjamin Franklin in the city of Boston? Do you know if there are?
Correct. Yes.
So BLS has the honor, or rather, Franklin has the honor of being commemorated by your lovely school.
Well, we're proud to have him as an alum.
Would you say that of all the school alumni, Benjamin Franklin is considered? What was the motto for the school again? Number one. Sumus Primi.
So we've had a lot of pretty incredible names in our past, and we have a lot who are in our current as well, like many big names right now. But Franklin is certainly one of the first names that always comes up when we talk about Boston Latin School. We'll say Boston Latin School, where Benjamin Franklin attended. Obviously, some of the other big names are important to us as well, but he's certainly near the apex of those names.
And just quickly, you yourself are an alumni of the school, is that correct?
Yes, throughout the years, so many of our heads of schools, as well as many of our teaching staff now, are alumni of the school. People love coming back to work here at Boston Latin.
And when did you graduate?
Well, that has to be on the podcast. No, I graduated from Boston Latin School in 1991. And then I had two sons who attended Boston Latin School. One of them graduated in 2018, and the other one graduated in 2021.
Oh, congratulations. And when did you were you working at the school at the time?
I was not. I was the principal of another school in the Boston Public Schools. And then my son Noel graduated in 2021, and I came in after he graduated. And maybe my friends from England will like that I named my son Noel Gallagher. So.
Oh, nice. Excellent name. Is the other one Liam?
You know what? If my other son is Devin, the reason why I didn't call him Liam is because my buddy Greg had a kid a month beforehand and named him Liam. And we had either Liam or Devin, and we went with Devin just because he named his son Liam.
Wow.
Yeah. We were over your way a couple times to see Oasis this summer. So I can't even define it for people over here what it was like. It was just unreal. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
Anyways, I took us way off track.
So the school is still going today. Roughly how many students are there at the Boston Latin School?
So currently, Boston Latin School services over 2,400 students from all neighborhoods of the city of Boston, grades 7 through 12, and representing a pretty good balance of males and females. You know, given that we only started admitting females in 1972, we actually have slightly more females than males. But they come from all neighborhoods in the city of Boston, from all backgrounds, religions, races, schools that we have here in the city of Boston. It's a great place to come together as a community representative of our city, and it's a pretty unique place.
So you've come a long way from a couple of benches in the schoolmaster's house to 2,400 students.
Yes, which is by far the largest school in the entire city of Boston.
And is there still an exam to become a student, or?
Yes, so some things have not changed. There is still an exam to become a student here at Boston Latin School. Students are still expected to take 4 years of Latin. Students are still expected to perform declamations up through their sophomore year. There are still misdemeanor marks for students who may be violating any of our policies. So a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things still remain the same.
And you wear a lot of your traditions proudly, I imagine.
We do. We do pride ourselves on being a classical and a contemporary school. We give students the best of what we have for nearly 400 years academically, both with the classics, but also with contemporary work as well. And
so the school itself is nearly 400 years old. And next year, or rather when this episode comes out this year, America is turning 250. Does the school have any plans to celebrate America 250, or what can students expect this year?
It's interesting because the celebrations here in Boston really started last year because we were celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, Paul Revere's Row, and Paul Revere's Row across the harbor, followed by Paul Revere's Ride, the battles of Lexington and Concord. So Boston celebrations really started this summer with a lot of fireworks displays, and a lot of things that were going on throughout the city. And that's going to continue now through next year. Here at Boston Latin School, we continue to celebrate America and who we are as a school just by the work that we're doing every day. But we'll be a part of any celebrations, any and all celebrations that the city will continue to have throughout the next year.
And we are all looking forward to seeing some of the celebrations that will be taking place later on this year as well. That brings today's episode to a close, which leaves me to say, Jason, thank you very much for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks, Henry.
That was Jason Gallagher, head of school at the Boston Latin School. Join me next time when we talk to another famous American education institution, the University of Pennsylvania, to discuss Franklin's life in Philadelphia and his civic projects that helped put the city on the map. Until then, goodbye.